Hello, everyone. Welcome to our seminar topic today called The Grief Journey with Angela Gentile. I'd like to welcome Angela and for taking the time out today to present to our RTAM members. I will hand over everything to Angela for
Thank
introduction.
you.
Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'd like to thank Jayesh for inviting me to speak to the group today. I know he said he was on a plane or something today. I'm not sure where he's at, but thank you, Jayesh, and thank you, Diane, for helping me organize this. And thank you for being here. And I don't know what brought you here today, but if you are grieving yourself, my heart goes out to you. Just trying to change my next slide here. Okay. So when we lose someone close to us, our grief can be intense and life-changing. This presentation is about the importance of understanding grief and how we can help others and ourselves if and when we are faced with this normal but sometimes distressing and upsetting life event. Most of us will experience losses in our life, and some will be more life-altering than others. I call it the grief journey because the person who experiences grief doesn't experience it as a one-time isolated event. Grief is a normal human experience, and it takes time to process through all that it brings. Therefore, it can be described as a journey, a walk through the grieving experience. We will look at some different types of grief and loss, the emotions, thoughts, and behaviors associated with loss, coping strategies, stigmas, and my own grief journey thus far, and things that I have done that have helped me. I will share some personal information on how I have been coping with the loss of my mother at the end of April this year. So I hope you can see this image here. This is an image of a statue called Emptiness. It was created by a grieving parent. And when you look at that picture, think about what feelings does that evoke in you? Like, what does that symbolize to you? Grief is an inevitable part of the human experience, yet it remains one of the most challenging emotions to navigate. There's often overlap and confusion when it comes to feelings of sadness, depression, and grief. As a counselor, I often help people distinguish what it is that they're feeling. When defining these three similar feelings and experiences, we can see that there's overlap and similarities. So sadness is a normal emotional response to various stressors or life events. It typically subsides with time and does not significantly impair daily functioning. Depression is a clinical condition characterized by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and loss of interest or pleasure in activities. It often requires professional intervention and may be accompanied by physical symptoms. Grief is a natural response to loss, encompassing a wide range of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. While grief can share similarities with sadness and depression, it is typically time limited and varies for each person and is tied to a specific loss. So the definition of grief, the way that I would see it, is it's a complex emotional response triggered by the loss of someone or something significant in our lives. It can manifest in numerous ways, impacting our thoughts, behaviors, and overall well-being. While grief is often associated with the death of a loved one, it can also arise from other types of losses, such as the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, or a significant change in one's health. Popular sayings about grief often reflect the universal experience of loss and the complexities of navigating the grieving process. Here are some well-known expressions, and notice if you have heard these sayings before, or if you yourself have used these sayings. And also, as you listen to them, think, do you agree with this or not? Because we all have different experiences and different beliefs. The first one is, time heals all wounds. This saying suggests that with time, the pain of our grief will lessen and eventually heal. Grief is the price we pay for love. This phrase acknowledges the deep connection between love and loss, emphasizing that the intensity of grief reflects the depth of one's affection for the deceased. Grief never ends, but it changes. It's a passage, not a place to stay. This saying highlights the evolving nature of grief, emphasizing that while it may never truly disappear, it can transform over time, allowing individuals to adapt and find meaning in their loss. The only way out is through. This expression underscores the importance of facing grief head on and allowing oneself to experience the pain fully in order to move forward in the healing process. We never truly get over a loss, but we can move forward and evolve with it. This saying acknowledges that while the pain of loss may always be present to some extent, individuals can learn to integrate their experiences and find growth and meaning in their journey through grief. Grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. This metaphor captures the unpredictable nature of grief, likening it to the rhythmic movement of the ocean's tides, while emotions may intensify and recede in cycles. What we once have enjoyed, we can never lose. All that we love deeply becomes part of us. This quote by Helen Keller highlights the enduring impact of love and the ways in which cherished memories of the deceased continue to shape and enrich our lives, even after they are gone. These sayings serve as reminders of the universality of grief and offer comfort, perspective, and validation to those navigating the complexities of loss. People often describe grief as a complex and multifaceted experience that encompasses a wide range of emotions, thoughts, physical sensations. While everyone's experience of grief is unique, there are common themes and descriptions that emerge when individuals attempt to articulate what grief feels like. Think for a moment what grief feels like for you, or how you perceive grief feels for others. Grief could be described as intense sadness, emotional turmoil, physical symptoms may emerge, yearning and longing, disorientation and confusion, social withdrawal, spiritual or existential angst, which is finding meaning or purpose, or fragmentation of identity, such as struggling to reconcile who you were before the loss and who you are now. Grief is a deeply personal and complex experience that defies easy description. People may use a variety of metaphors, analogies, and imagery to convey what grief feels like, but ultimately, it is something that must be felt and experienced to be fully understood. There are challenges to the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work on the stages of grief. So there are 5 stages, and while her work has been widely influential and revered, they have also been critiqued for oversimplifying the grief process and implying a linear progression. Contemporary research suggests that grief is more complex and individualized than a series of sequential stages. David Kessler has done some work on this, and he wrote a book on the 6th stage of grief and loss called Finding meaning. It is presumed that there is a possibility of being able to discover something meaningful in the dead person's life, or how knowing how they shaped us, maybe in how the way they died, can help us to make the world safer for ours. Finding meaning is the stage where the healing often resides. Kessler also reminds us that there is no wrong way to grieve. Grieving is as individual as each of us. Our grieving needs are different in every case. Mourning and bereavement are integral aspects of the grieving process, each carrying its own nuances and manifestations. While often used interchangeably, they represent distinct phases in the journey of coping with loss. Mourning encompasses the outward expressions of grief, including rituals, ceremonies, and cultural practices aimed at honoring and commemorating the deceased. It is a visible and communal process where individuals publicly acknowledge their loss and seek solace through shared rituals. Examples of mourning can vary widely across cultures and traditions, from elaborate funeral ceremonies to intimate gatherings of remembrance. For instance, in some cultures, wearing black attire and holding religious services are common mourning practices, while others may engage in celebratory ceremonies to commemorate the life of the deceased. A popular event held nowadays after someone dies is called a celebration of life. Bereavement, on the other hand, refers to the internal experiences of grief and loss. It encompasses the emotional, psychological, and spiritual responses to the death of a loved one. Bereavement is deeply personal and subjective, involving a range of emotions such as sadness, anger, guilt, and longing. Unlike mourning, which may have a specific cultural or social guideline, bereavement is inherently individualized and may vary widely from person to person. Examples of bereavement can include withdrawing from social interactions, experiencing intense waves of emotion triggered by memories, or struggling to find meaning and purpose in the absence of the deceased. So grieving rituals and customs surrounding the loss of a spouse, for example, vary significantly across different cultures and societies, reflecting diverse beliefs, traditions, and values. These customs often serve as a means of expressing mourning, honoring the deceased, and providing support to the bereaved. One such example is the mourning practices observed in Old Italy, where widows would wear black dresses for an extended period following the death of their husbands. Think about your cultural or other cultural practices when it comes to rituals and customs when someone dies. I'd like to discuss 5 types of grief and loss. I'll just touch on them briefly. And there really isn't just one type of grief, and I've discovered there are many types. So loss grief is the one that's most common, and we describe it like the feeling of losing someone when they die, or losing a pet, or it could even be something like losing a job. So it can be a loss when someone feels like a health problem could cause them changes in their functioning or threaten their livelihood. I experienced this when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2017. When you face a life-threatening illness, your feelings and thoughts go to scary places. I feared losing out on seeing my children grow up, graduate, get married, have children of their own, etc. It was the future losses that I was grieving for. I also experienced loss and grief when I was expecting to move on to a new job, and then the union discovered that there was a breach of contract when the job should have been awarded to someone else. I was devastated, angry, sad, and I felt physically sick. I called in sick the day I was supposed to start my new job. I just couldn't face it. I also saw my children go through their first big grief experience when our beloved guinea pig died. The guinea pig was one of their first pets, and they were both so sad that we stayed in bed crying and had to miss their sports practices that night. It was horrible for me as a mother to see my children in so much pain. We hugged and cried for what seemed like 2 or 3 hours. There are many other experiences people will feel loss from. Think of loss grief as the result of a death, which could be the death of a person, a pet, a job, the death of a job, imagine that. The death of your health as you knew it, your relationship, there could have been a breakup, or even life as you knew it. Think back to your early memories. What was there? Was there a loss of a pet or a family member that you remember? And how did it affect you and your family? Losses can also be cumulative, where you have more than one loss to process at a time. Cumulative grief is a phenomenon experienced when individuals endure multiple losses over a relatively short period of time. Unlike singular instances of grief, cumulative grief compounds the emotional burden, intensifying the mourning process and complicating the journey toward healing. Each loss adds to the existing grief, creating a cumulative effect that can feel overwhelming and exhausting. Whether it's the death of several loved ones, a series of significant life changes, or ongoing adversity, the accumulation of losses can erode one's emotional resilience and coping mechanisms. Navigating cumulative grief requires recognition of its cumulative nature and acknowledgement of the unique challenges it presents. Individuals may find themselves constantly navigating waves of sorrow, struggling to find moments of respite amidst the loss. Losses can also cause secondary losses, which also make life very difficult, uncomfortable, and takes a lot of getting used to. Ambiguous loss occurs when the loss is unclear or unresolved, such as in the case of a missing person or situations where a loved one is physically present but emotionally absent. I talk about this concept in my book on Alzheimer's, dementia, and memory loss. When a person has dementia, the loved ones left behind often talk about their loved one being there in a physical form, but their personality and relationship with them has changed so much that it feels like losing someone, although they are still present. Disenfranchised grief, when the grief is not openly acknowledged or socially supported, such as in the case of a pet's death or the loss of a non-traditional relationship. Not too long ago, a friend of mine lost her partner of 7 years. They were exclusive and serious, and she was a part of her partner's and her partner's family's life. When he suddenly passed away, her partner's family did not acknowledge her as part of the family. In their grief, they instead focused on their mother, who had passed away 10 years prior. My friend was gutted, and all her friends, including me, were horrified to read the obituary, and her name wasn't even acknowledged. We felt so badly for her. This is an example of disenfranchised grief. It complicates the situation as the grieving person's experience is not observed or acknowledged as it should be. Anticipatory grief is experienced before an expected loss, such as when a loved one is terminally ill. It is described as a grief for an upcoming loss event. This is an opportunity to give voice to 1, will you please forgive me? 2, I forgive you. 3, thank you. 4, I love you. And 5, goodbye. Complicated grief is characterized by intense and prolonged symptoms of grief that impair daily functioning and do not diminish over time. The DSM-5 calls it prolonged grief disorder, and the criteria states that in order to be diagnosed with prolonged grief disorder, it requires that the distressing symptoms of grief continue for at least 12 months following the loss of a close attachment, and that the grief response is characterized by intense longing, yearning for the deceased person, and or preoccupation with thoughts and memories of the lost person to a clinically significant degree nearly every day for at least the past month. There is some argument by others that making prolonged grief disorder a psychiatric illness contributes to the stigma associated with deep grief. Therefore, people will try to hide their feelings, and this may make it more difficult for them to move through their grief journey. Perhaps you have experienced grief in one or more of these ways, or know someone dealing with some form of grief right now. Grief can cause people to rely on unhealthy coping mechanisms. This in turn can cause other problems. How do we know when a person is not dealing well with grief or loss? 1, compulsive behaviors such as overspending and Netflix binges, but it doesn't count if the Netflix shows are funny. And I'll get to that a little bit later. So making you laugh can be good. 2, withdrawal from relationships. Avoid talking about the loss. Don't want to be around people who ask how you're doing. Fear of crying in front of people. Over-functioning, saying things like everything is fine, or they immerse themselves in their work, or they try to be distracted. It might be hard for someone if they're not dealing well with the loss because maybe they're more irritable. Maybe they have drama in their relationships. They're fighting with people. They're finding distraction from internal pain or a twisted expression of that pain. So they're expressing it in a way that's more irritable and argumentative. They might be having persistent sleep issues. So sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, or just not being able to get a restful sleep. Physical symptoms might emerge, such as illnesses or digestive issues, muscle tension, headaches, high blood pressure. And there might be mental health symptoms, such as worsening depression or anxiety or suicidality. You or someone you know might be struggling and wondering how to turn things around. One of the most difficult questions is to ask, when is it time to seek help from a mental health professional? The first thing I do is I suggest that the person talk to their healthcare professional, such as a doctor or a nurse practitioner. And then the next step would be to seek help from a mental health professional, such as a counselor, therapist, social worker, or a psychologist. It may be advisable to seek professional help if the grief symptoms persist and significantly impair daily functioning, or there are thoughts of self-harm or suicidal thoughts, or substance abuse or other unhealthy coping mechanisms that are developing, or complicated grief symptoms arising, such as persistent feelings of guilt or worthlessness. When we experience the loss of someone or something near and dear to us, we may experience a wide variety of emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And remember, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Common emotions experienced, and there are many, but these are common ones: shock, sadness, anger, guilt, relief. Emotions can come in bursts, and our feelings of grief can be triggered. Grief bursts come when you are least expecting it. You could be having a nice visit with a friend, and the topic relates to something that triggers a feeling of sadness in you with respect to your deceased loved one. It is best to let the feeling come over you, let the tears fall, and honor your loved one in the moment. It is a way for you to process that the person is no longer with you in the physical world, but they will always be in your heart and in your memories. When my mom died, I soon realized she had prepared me for that day. My thoughts were all about trying to understand why she left and what she thought of in terms of preparing me for her demise. Some people say they can see their loved ones or have visits from their loved ones, deceased loved ones. Soon after my mother died, I had a nightmare that my husband died the same way, of sudden cardiac arrest. It was very disturbing and upsetting. How long does grief last? Grief is a highly individualized process, and there's no set timeline for recovery. While some individuals may begin to feel better after a few months, others may experience waves of grief for much longer. Certain milestones, anniversaries, and reminders can trigger waves of grief even years after the loss has occurred. Birthdays, holidays, significant events may evoke memories of the deceased and intensify the feelings of sadness and longing. I know of a situation where a child was struck by lightning about 10 years ago. He was killed instantly. The family, especially the mother, still intensely grieves this loss. She posts on Facebook every heavenly birthday and every year a remembrance of the day he died. Grief can go on for a lifetime, and it depends on the circumstances. Each loss and how we react to it is so individualized. Here are some factors that may affect the way we react to a loss. Who died, and what was the relation? How close and connected was that person? What happened to them? How did they die? Was it expected or horrific and tragic? Did they get to say goodbye? When did it happen? Where did the person die? Were they in the same town or were they far away? Who was the executor? This role is very intense and time specific. This affects the ability to grieve. How has this person handled grief in the past? Over the span of my career, I have seen many times where one of the spouses in a long-term marriage passes away, and the remaining spouses feel like half of them died along with their spouse. When people's lives are so intertwined over the span of 20, 30, 40, or more years, the loss can be very devastating, gutting, and the remaining person never gets over it. Quote, air quotes. I have heard them say things like, half of my heart is missing, and I never expected him or her to go before me. There's even a condition that can affect the heart called broken heart syndrome. It's essential to recognize that healing from grief is not linear and may involve periods of intense emotions. The short answer to the question, how long does grief take, or how long does it last, is as long as it takes. How we cope with our grief can affect how we go on with our regular day-to-day activities. Here are 5 healthy and positive practices, self-care practices, which can support our emotional well-being. Seeking support from family, friends, and others. Sharing the news with others often results in the outpouring sympathy and of kind words and deeds. You won't feel so alone, as many others have experienced a loss similar to yours, and you will immediately feel understood and heard. Your pain and feelings will most likely be validated and supported by your closest family and friends. This is comforting. It will also mean you might have to cancel or postpone or change some plans, and they will understand why and be empathetic to your situation. Speaking openly with other family members who suffered the same loss can also be comforting. Seek professional help for overwhelming feelings or trouble returning to daily activities over time, and consider joining a group for grief support. So a grief support group, either in person or online. The other way, I've got 5 ways here. So the second one is engaging in meaningful activities, staying active, getting outside, seeing your friends, working, volunteering, attending church activities, continuing to stay busy with meaningful activities will help you heal as you process your feelings of grief and loss. 3, practice mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation can help you focus on the positive things in your world, which will help you move through your difficult and challenging feelings. Relaxation and deep breathing techniques can also help you get focused on your body, mind, and soul, nurturing your body as it heals. Prayer can help nurture your spirit. Yoga is a good mindfulness practice as well as a relaxing exercise that I have found helpful to me. Expressing emotions through creative outlets. Crying is a healthy, natural release as part of the grieving process. Accept and allow a range of emotions. When was the last time you cried? You had a good cry. Did you feel that you needed to hide it or suppress it? Or were you able to embrace it and let it flow? If you or someone you know is grieving, it may help to experience feelings openly through writing or journaling. I'm a writer, so my natural go-to is and was writing about my experience with loss and grief. I know of people who paint, and one of the ladies I have on my Facebook page lost her husband, and she now focuses on painting pictures of things that make her feel happy. She paints flowers, she paints birds. There are other creative outlets like crafting and woodworking to help you express your emotions. Think about writing a letter to a deceased loved one that you may never send, or write your thoughts in a journal and reflect on your relationship and the meaning that it had. Humor can also help us heal. My mom loved to laugh at herself, and she would often tell me stories. She actually wrote them out, and now I can read them back, and it makes me chuckle. Laughing can also help us feel better, as it is a natural way to reduce stress. Laughing helps your brain release endorphins, which can help lessen the feelings of sadness and stress that often accompany loss. Watching funny videos on Facebook or YouTube, watching your favorite comedian in person or online, reading a funny book, hanging out with a humorous friend, or turning on your favorite sitcom on Netflix can help us feel better. Laughter yoga has been proven to be helpful to many. And think about what makes you laugh out loud. Another way to help us heal is to make friends with our grief. One man said he named his grief Fritz, and he would talk to it. For some people, it helps to use and embrace our grief. It can help us process and move forward. This technique is called externalizing, and it works. These techniques and tips and more can be put into your treasure chest and are at your disposal at a moment's notice. Positive affirmations, counting blessings, being grateful, writing in a joy journal, fostering and nurturing relationships with friends and family can help you get through the hard times. Think about what tools are in your treasure chest so that when you need a boost, there are lots of options for you to choose from. These strategies can help us be resilient and cope with whatever may come our way. There can be stigma associated with grieving, as society may have certain expectations or norms regarding how individuals should express or cope with their grief. We can combat this stigma by being aware of what these stigmas are and using some of the tips that follow. As you listen to these 4 points, consider where you are at in terms of your own beliefs for both yourself as well as others. Timeline expectations. There may be societal pressure to move on or get over it, get over the loss within a certain time frame, leading to feelings of guilt or shame if individuals continue to struggle with grief beyond societal expectations. Expression of emotions. There can be stigma surrounding the expression of emotions related to grief, with some individuals feeling pressured to suppress or hide their feelings of sadness, anger, or vulnerability. Perception of weakness. There may be a perception that experiencing grief is a sign of weakness or vulnerability, leading individuals to feel ashamed or embarrassed about their emotional responses to loss. Comparison and judgment. Grieving individuals may feel judged or compared to others who appear to be coping better or grieving differently, leading to feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt. So how can we support others who are grieving? Check in with yourself to see if you are supporting others or if there is room for improvement. Normalize the grief. Educate others about the normal and natural aspects of grief, emphasizing that it is a natural, universal experience that affects individuals differently. By normalizing grief as a natural response to loss, we can reduce stigma and promote empathy and understanding. Encourage open dialogue. Create safe and supportive spaces for individuals to openly discuss their experiences of grief without fear of judgment or stigma. Encourage honest and authentic conversations about grief, allowing individuals to express their emotions and share their stories without shame or embarrassment. Provide support and resources. Offer the practical assistance, such as helping with household chores or providing meals. Recommend resources to individuals who are grieving, such as access to counseling services, support groups, or community organizations. By providing resources and support, we can help individuals feel less alone in their grief and empower them to seek help when needed. Challenge stereotypes and myths. Challenge stereotypes and myths by myths surrounding grief by promoting accurate information and dispelling misconceptions. Encourage empathy and compassion by acknowledging the unique and individual nature of each person's grief journey. Respect their unique grieving process and timeline. Practice empathy and compassion towards individuals who are grieving, recognizing that grief is a deeply personal and complex experience. Offer your condolences and express your willingness to support them. Validate their feelings, offer a listening ear, and provide support without judgment or expectations. Avoid minimizing their grief or offering unsolicited advice. Avoid cliches or platitudes as they may invalidate their experience. Soon after my mother died, a person close to me said, "You just have to be strong." I know they meant well, but I felt that invalidated my feelings and was a message telling me to hold back the emotions and that come along with grief. Signifying experiencing sad emotions is the opposite of being strong. I know that person meant well, but we have to be careful of how we use our words. Respect their need for space and time to grieve. Sometimes we just need to be alone in our thoughts, and we need to be able to have that time. Encourage self-care and healthy coping strategies. And lead by example. Lead by example by being open and vulnerable about your own experiences of grief and loss. By sharing your story and demonstrating empathy and compassion towards others, you can help break down stigma and create a culture of acceptance and support. A dear friend shared a personal story with me that she said I could share. She said, a good neighbor lost her husband and she was devastated. My friend offered to send her a daily morning greeting via text. You know those GIFs, GIF, with good morning or some other decorative greeting. Sometimes they have motion and they move around. She told her neighbor, I will send you a greeting every morning. If you don't respond, I will know something is not right, and I will come over right away to see how you're doing. She said she's been doing this for a year. She considers herself to be an anchor for her neighbor. You could be an anchor for someone, or perhaps you could ask someone else to be your anchor in your time of need. By fostering a culture of acceptance and compassion, we can create a more inclusive and supportive environment where individuals feel empowered to grieve openly and seek the help they need to help to heal, to cope with, and move forward with their loss. Navigating conversations with a grieving person requires sensitivity, empathy, and understanding. While offering support and comfort is important, there are certain phrases and comments that may inadvertently cause harm or exacerbate the grieving individual's pain. Here are some things you should avoid saying to a grieving person. And we've probably all said one or two of these things before. So, it's not like that we're all perfect. We all say these things. So just something to be aware of. I know how you feel. Even if you've experienced a similar loss, everyone's grief is unique, and comparing your experiences may invalidate the grieving person's emotions and diminish their sense of individuality. You should be over it by now. Grieving is a deeply personal and individual process, and there's no timeline for healing. Pressuring someone to move on or get over the grief can be dismissive and hurtful. It's all part of God's plan, or everything happens for a reason. Religious or philosophical explanations for the loss may not resonate with everyone and can come across as dismissive of the grieving person's pain and suffering. You'll feel better soon. While well-intentioned, this statement can minimize the intensity of the grieving person's emotions and imply that their pain is temporary or insignificant. At least they're in a better place now. While intended to provide comfort, this phrase may inadvertently invalidate the grieving person's feelings of loss and longing for the deceased. And it's different when the grieving person says it. It's just maybe don't say it if the grieving person is not saying it. You should be grateful for what you still have. Encouraging gratitude can be helpful, but it's essential to acknowledge and validate the grieving person's emotions without minimizing their pain or sorrow. Here's the classic one. I see it and hear it all the time, and I've said it before. Let me know if you need anything. While this statement is well-meaning, it places the burden on the grieving person to reach out for help, instead of offering specific forms of support or assistance based on their needs. You need to be strong for your family, your friend, whoever it is. Expecting the grieving person to suppress their emotions for the sake of others can be damaging and prevent them from processing their grief in a healthy and authentic way. It's time to move on. Grief is not something that can be resolved or fixed, and pressuring someone to move on can invalidate their ongoing pain and mourning. They wouldn't want you to be sad. While the intention may be to provide comfort, this statement can inadvertently invalidate the grieving person's emotions and imply that their grief is inappropriate or unwarranted. Instead of using these phrases, it's important to listen actively, validate the grieving person's experiences and their feelings, and offer genuine empathy, support, and companionship. Simply being present and showing that you care can make a significant difference in their healing journey. So this is my grieving journey thus far. I'll try to do it without crying. I lost my mother, Virginia, pictured here, unexpectedly on April 30th of this year. This came as a shock, and I was in disbelief. I felt fear and sadness. I was gutted, and I cried. This was the first time I had lost a very close family member. Acute grief is what a person feels immediately after they learn of the loss of a loved one. The feelings are usually intense, but are not long-lived. After the initial shock, the first thing I did when I heard my mother died was I called my husband. I was shocked and upset, and then I had to share the sad news of my mother's passing. As difficult as it was, I had to share with my children, my uncle, my relatives, and my friends. My immediate family helped spread the news to extended family. It was very, very difficult when I had to make the calls to my mom's friends. They were absolutely devastated. I cried with them. I also posted the news on my Facebook page, which included some photos of her and I together. I received many kind and comforting words of sympathy. Many people shared with me little stories about my mom. It warmed my heart and helped me remember the positive memories of her. My friends and family all told me, if you need anything, let me know. I didn't even know what I needed at the time, but it was nice to hear, but I wasn't really able to ask for help at that time. Looking back, I think the best thing we can do for a loved one who is grieving is to just do something. I had a friend who told me she was coming over and they would order pizza and we would eat together. That was very nice, kind, and helpful. I received many sympathy cards, text messages, and phone calls too, which were also very comforting. These are some other things that I did in no particular order. One way I cope with difficult situations is write. I write. So I wrote her a letter called You Knew Me So Well. Writing a letter to her was very therapeutic. It was like I was having a conversation with her. I wore her favorite color, purple. I wrote her obituary with the help of family. I talked to her out loud when I was by myself. This was mainly reflection. I talked to her out loud when I was with close family members in a form of prayer. I got out photographs and remembered good times with her. I listened to her voice on a voice memo I had on my phone. I planned her memorial gathering and wrote a eulogy. I planted a purple flower at her gravesite. I kept her handwritten recipes. I put a hope sign she gave me beside my bed. I read stories and poems she had written. I wore some of her favorite jewelry, especially a ring and a bracelet. I gave away some of her things to people who knew her and will enjoy them in her memory. I donated most of her belongings to organizations she would have approved of, a women's shelter, thrift shops, Habitat for Humanity, etc. I kept some of her personal belongings that I can also continue to enjoy, like a gold-colored fringe shawl she wore to her grandson's, my son's wedding. I lit a candle to signify her spirit, warmth, and love. I took over the responsibility of watching over her brother, my uncle, who is elderly. I am reconnecting and building a stronger relationship with my younger brother. I think of my mom when I see a cardinal, a butterfly, or a hummingbird. I made 2 music playlists, 1 mom songs and 2 my mom's favorite songs. I read over her life story I had asked her to help me with during the pandemic. I read over her chapter called The Power of a Mother's Love that she had written for my book on cancer. All of these things I did help me accept my mom's passing, as well as lift my spirits. These are all good things that I did for myself and or my mom in her heavenly form. I felt I was doing things my mom would be happy to know about and that made me feel better. These actions have helped me move forward with my grief, and I'm sure there are more actions to come. As you can see from my experience, there are many ways to grieve, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. And there's no time limit either. We don't get over our loss, but we learn how to move forward with it. There are also many resources that are available. As I was preparing for this presentation and then finding resources for myself, these are 6 that I thought were really helpful. There's many more, but the Palliative Manitoba website, My Grief from Canadian Virtual Hospice is really good. My Grief Assist has great videos and resources. The book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Coping with Grief and Loss by Megan Devine is very good. There's a book and a website, What's Your Grief? And counselors for help. So you can always look at Psychology Today website, and I'm one of those counselors, just as an FYI. And to contact me, you can email me at angela.gentile111@gmail.com. You can call me or text me at 204-298-1012. You can check out my website, www.angelaggentile.com. I'm also found on Facebook. You can find me at Angela G. Gentile, MSW, RSW, and a list of my books and services can be found on my website listed above. So thank you again for your kind attention and listening and hearing my story. And I'd be welcome to, I'd love to take any questions or comments that you have for me.